I was using Wireshark before CEH as well, but I didn't realize the potential of sniffing. When I went through CEH, I actually learned a lot about sniffing, and there are two ways we can sniff on the network, and what is the difference between sniffing in a network where you have hubs and switches and kinds of things, right? So earlier, my use of Wireshark was only limited to starting Wireshark and checking what was coming to my laptop or coming to my system. That's about it. But CH really helped me understand the various techniques of sniffing, how to use sniffing for various other purposes, and how we can use it for offensive purposes as well. So packet sniffing is basically when you start a sniffer on your system and start capturing the packets on your system, right? There are various ways you can do sniffing. There are hardware sniffers as well, which you can attach to actually a physical line and then tap from there and get all the feed. Uh, but probably that's a very advanced thing that you would do as offensive security. But uh, as such, you can capture the packets, but just by starting Wireshark as well. And if you start Wireshark, then it asks you whether you want to go in a promiscuous mode or not. Promiscuous mode is basically you start processing or looking at all the packets that are coming to your system rather than just the packets which are destined to you, right? By default, the stack, whether it is Windows, Mac, or Linux, would only accept the packets that are destined to your IP address and discard all other packets that are coming on the network interface. Whereas there might be a lot of other packets that might be coming to your interface. When you start looking at those packets which are not destined to you, you can get a lot of other information. For example, you could end up sniffing a FTP or a telnet session, which are completely in plain text, right? Which basically means that you would be able to get the passwords or usernames or a lot of other information. A lot of sniffers also allow you to recreate the objects. If you use Wireshark, also Wireshark has that object. If there is plain HTTP, you can export all the objects from HTTP, which means that if someone downloaded something from net and it was over HTTP and you sniffed it, then you can recreate the whole file, right? So all those kind of things where someone is using an insecure packet, insecure protocol, uh, can be sniffed, and you can get a lot of information, really juicy information, I must say. So, as I said in some of the earlier questions, basically, sniffing is when you start capturing all the packets that your NIC card is able to see, right? Uh, it's not just sniffing the packets that are destined to you. There are other ways of sniffing which are called as active sniffing, where you force someone else to send the packets to you so that you can sniff on it. But just with passive sniffing as well, you can get a lot of data if you land up in an environment where you have hubs rather than switches. Even with switches, you can do active sniffing and ensure that uh, switches start acting as hub and send all those packets to you. And when this happens, then networking basically is when all these protocols were being developed, there was not so much concern about security. So most of these protocols that you would see on the network are by default, not secured. They are not encrypted. Uh, and a lot of networks today also, when you go into internal networks, are not secured within the internal network, right? The zero security concept is still not so prevalent that everything will be encrypted within internal network, which means that once you start sniffing in the internal network, probably you are going to get a lot of credentials, lot of information leakage, a lot of other stuff which would be very valuable to the company, and if it gets into attacker's hand, could be very detrimental to company's reputation and health. The best defense against network sniffing is basically encryption, right? For all the services that you are using, you should have encryption, whether in terms of actually using the encrypted protocol, for example, HTTPS or POP3S or IMAPS or SSH instead of Telnet or SFTP instead of FTP. Uh, all these, or if you cannot do any of those, then at least use IPSec or any of the encrypted tunnels, right? So that the packets itself are encrypted, and hence when someone is even sniffing on the network, he might be able to capture the data, but he will not be able to get any information out of this. And you will now never leak your username and password just because you were using outdated protocol. So the best defense is always encryption against any sniffing attack, in my opinion. Hackers can get all kind of juicy information when they do network sniffing. Uh, they can get a lot of interesting files if you are transferring files over FTP and those are not encrypted. Then, as I said, uh, the sniffers themselves are capable of recreating the objects. They are capable of showing a lot of analysis over what has been captured, right? So definitely they can get the username and password if you are using simple protocols like FTP or Telnet, which are outdated and are not encrypted. But other than that, there is a lot of possibility of information leakage, right? You might end up leaking a lot of confidential document or other documents in your network if you are not using encrypted protocols and someone is sniffing on your network. Okay, so Sniffer app is basically an app which allows you to capture the packets from your NIC interface. And not only that, it also allows you to put the interface into promiscuous mode. Without a promiscuous mode, basically, it will not really help you a lot to capture those packets, right? Because then you will be getting only the packets that are destined to you, which means that all the juicy information that is flowing around in the network, you will never be able to capture. Um, but it has its own uses even without promiscuous mode. For example, if you are doing a network troubleshooting, you can use a sniffer app to just capture the data that is going out of your system or coming back to your system and troubleshoot network issues. But as a offender or a defender or an attacker in a network, the real game is when you put it in a promiscuous mode. And in promiscuous mode, you are capturing all the packets that is flowing in the network that you can get hold of, right? Yes, passive sniffing is a threat. It's a huge threat, especially when you look at it from a internal network perspective, right? Uh, Internal networks are still using a lot of old and outdated protocols, for example, FTP and Telnet and so on and so forth. Uh, Zero trust is still not there in a lot of internal networks. I would say a lot of internal networks still do not have zero trust, and they are still using non-encrypted form of the protocols, which basically means that you could even see IMAP or POP3 in non-encrypted form in internal network. Uh, these probably are sending mails to an internal mail server, which is then sending it over internet in an encrypted form. But within the internet network, a lot of protocols are used which are not really encrypted, which means that passive sniffing can give out a lot of details. It can really be very harmful if someone is able to get into internal network and do a passive sniffing.